The 2022-2023 NBA regular season has officially been wrapped up for a little over 2 weeks now, and while the NBA playoffs is proving to be every bit as fun as anticipated, I thought it'd be fun in this video to take a look back at every NBA team's best regular season finish in franchise history. For all of you, the regular season doesn't matter, folks out there. I think you'll find this video just as bit as interesting as those that do think it matters. There's a lot of fun teams on this list, and the NBA nostalgia is next level. I want to clarify, this is not what I think is the best team in NBA history for each franchise. These are strictly the best regular season finishes based off winning percentage. This video is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, an app that allows you to predict higher or lower on individual NBA player stats. Here's an entry we won the other night for $250. Sign up now using code HARDWOOD. You get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Let's have some fun and make some money together during this NBA playoffs. Let's start in alphabetical order with the Atlanta Hawks. This franchise has had 5 seasons of 55-plus wins, but the best one was the 2014-2015 team, finishing 60-22 and the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. They had a net rating that year of plus 5.8, which was good for 4th in the league. This 2015 Hawks team was one of the more interesting regular season teams I've seen. They were 6 games under 500 the year before and 48-34 the year after, with pretty much the exact same team. They greatly outperformed preseason expectations as their preseason over-under for wins was 42.5. Coached by current Bucks head coach Mike Budenholzer, this was an incredibly balanced team with all 5 starters averaging over 12 points per game. There really was no star on this roster, but they did have 4 all-stars that season. They were not, however, able to finish the job off in the playoffs, losing to a newly returned LeBron James Cavaliers team. Next, we have a franchise littered with success, the Boston Celtics. Their greatest regular season was the 1972-1973 season, where they went 68-14 with 32-year-old John Havlicek leading the team in scoring at 23.8 per game. But the best player that season was league MVP Dave Cowens, averaging 20 and 16 boards. Kansas legend JoJo White scored nearly 20 a game as well, and this team was coached by former Celtic legend Tom Heinsohn. But despite this franchise having 17 championships, after beating Pete Maravich, Lou Hudson, and the Hawks in 6 games in the Eastern Conference semis, they lost to the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals in 7, who would go on to beat the Lakers in the finals. I will say the Knicks team they lost to was loaded. They had Walt Frazier, Dave DeBusschere, Willis Reed, Earl the Pearl Monroe, and more. And I'm also not going to feel bad for a franchise with 17 championships. Our next team is the Brooklyn Nets. We will be taking their best finish in the NBA, not the ABA. And that best regular season finish was the 2001-2002 Nets, where they finished 52-30. While this Nets team got swept by a Shaq and Kobe Lakers in the NBA Finals, head coach Byron Scott helped lead the likes of Jason Kidd, Kenyon Martin, Kerry Kittles, Keith Van Horn, and Richard Jefferson to a special season in which no player averaged 15 or more a game. They relied heavily on their league best defense, while Hall of Famer Jason Kidd dropped nearly 10 assists a game. During their playoff run, they were able to defeat a Reggie Miller Pacers, the Baron Davis Hornets, and a Paul Pierce Antoine Walker Celtics team. Looking back on it, it's disappointing that a Kyrie and KD duo in Brooklyn didn't win more than 52 games. I know they only had 3 years together and they were hurt off and on during that tenure. However, if you were to tell anyone in 2020 that this duo wouldn't win over 50 games together, it would have been an absolute shock. Our next NBA franchise is the Charlotte Hornets, and their best regular season was the 1996-97 year. They went 54-28 and were actually coached by Dave Cowens. Led by Glenn Rice at 26.8 points per game and 47 from 3. They also had Anthony Mason, who averaged 16, 11.7 boards, and 5.7 assists. A couple role players they had were Vlad Divac, which is from the Kobe trade, Del Curry, and Muggsy Bogues. Unfortunately, they were swept in the first round of the 97 playoffs by the New York Knicks, who had Patrick Ewing, Allen Houston, and Larry Johnson, who was able to get revenge after spending the previous 5 seasons with the Hornets. There's a reason this team is on the thumbnail. We all know what year this is. The 1995-96 Chicago Bulls, a team that broke the wins record, going 72-10 on the year and breaking the previous record from the 72 Lakers at 69-13. We all know this Bulls team was good, but when I start talking about the accolades of this team, it gets even more ridiculous. They only lost 3 playoff games total and beat the Supersonics in 6 in the finals. finals. They were first in the league in offensive and defensive rating for a net rating of a whopping plus 13.4. Michael Jordan scored 30.4 points per game that year, was the scoring champ, shot 42% from three, was the MVP and the finals MVP. Rodman was the rebounding champ of the league with 14.9 boards per game, and then Pippen averaged 19, 6, and 6. All three players were all NBA defensive first team, and MJ and Scottie were first team all NBA. Just a magical season and probably a great reminder for all of us to go back and rewatch The Last Dance. The Cleveland Cavaliers are our next franchise, and oddly enough, it was actually during LeBron's first stint with the Cavaliers that they put up the two highest win totals in franchise history. Ultimately, the best regular season record for the Cavs was the 2008-2009 team that went 66-16. They were fourth in offensive rating, third in defensive rating, and had the best net rating in the NBA that season. 24-year-old LeBron averaged 28.4 a game along with 7 boards and 7 assists, and it was the season he got his first MVP award of his career. We all know about the illustrious history of teammates LeBron played with. His second best player that year was Mo Williams. This team also had Big Z's, Adrunas Ilgauskas, Delonte West, Anderson Varejao, and Daniel Gibson off the bench. An absolute brutal roster, but they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, and despite LeBron's buzzer beater in Game 3, they couldn't take down Dwight Howard and the Magic, who eventually went on to lose to Kobe and the Lakers in the finals. The Dallas Mavericks may have the most disappointing team on this list. Their best season came in 2006-2007, a year after coming off a heartbreaking series loss in the finals to Dwayne Wade and the Heat. The Mavs responded, winning 67 games during the regular season the next year. Dirk Nowitzki averaged 24.6 and 9. Josh Howard and Jason Terry were second and third in scoring. After winning the MVP that year, Dirk and the Mavs looked poised to make another finals run, but instead they lost to the 8th-seeded We Believe Warriors, which is considered as one of the biggest upsets in playoff history. Facing elimination in Game 6, this Mavericks team lost by 25. If you're ever looking for a good story, go check out that 2007 Warriors team. I actually touched on that team in my last video, how far each seed has gone in NBA playoff history. Just like the Nets, the same rules apply to the Nuggets. We're taking a look at their best regular season finish in the NBA, not the ABA. And that best season did not take place with Carmelo Anthony or David Thompson or even back-to-back MVP Nikola Jokic, but with a balanced scoring attack and no true superstar. 2012-2013 Denver Nuggets. This squad, coached by George Karl, won 57 games. They had 6 guys score double figures and 3 guys with 8+, and also led the NBA in scoring that year. Andre Iguodala was probably the most prominent name on this team, but you also had Ty Lawson, Danilo Gallinari, and others. Instead of making noise in the NBA playoffs, this Nuggets team fell in the first round to a 47-win Golden State Warriors team led by 24-year-old Steph Curry and 22-year-old Klay Thompson. This was really the beginning of the Splash Brothers showing the basketball world how good they could potentially be. The Detroit Pistons' best regular season finish in franchise history was the 2005-2006 team going 64-18. This was pretty much the same squad that beat the Lakers in the finals 2 years previously and lost in 7 to the Spurs the year before. An iconic starting lineup in Chauncey Billups, Tayshaun Prince, Richard Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, and Ben Wallace. They beat a young LeBron in the Eastern Conference semis before losing to a young D Wade in the Eastern Conference Finals in 6 games. The Pistons' previous number 2 overall pick, Darko Milicic, played 5 minutes a game in only 25 games that season. I can only imagine what this team would have been if they would have chosen Carmelo or Dwayne Wade instead in that draft 2 years before. The 10th team on our list and the second on our thumbnail, we all know why this team is on here as well. The 2015-2016 Golden State Warriors. With the greatest regular season in NBA history, 73 wins and 9 losses. And I specifically say regular season because we all know why. Stephen Curry won his second MVP this season, the only unanimous MVP in NBA history, while averaging 30 points per game and only playing 34 minutes a game because they blew so many teams out. He also had the best shooting season in NBA history, making 402 threes, which is the most ever, and over 5 per game at a 45.5% clip. He also led the league with 2.1 steals a game. Steph was first team All-NBA, obviously, and Draymond Green was second team plus first team defense. defense. Finally, Clay was third-team All-NBA that year. Little known fact, Luke Walton was the interim head coach for the first 43 games, where the Warriors went 39-4 because Steve Kerr was recovering from back surgery. They faced a 3-1 deficit against Kevin Durant and the Oklahoma City Thunder in the Western Conference Finals before the Warriors took Game 5, Game 6 Clay happened, and the Warriors completed the comeback in 7 games. As impressive of a season this was for Golden State, it ended in disappointing fashion after blowing a 3-1 lead to LeBron James and the Cavaliers in one of the best finals series ever. Clearly the best finish in regular season history wasn't good enough as the Warriors went and got KD that offseason after beating him in the Western Conference Finals, which leads us to the rise of this next team. This is truly one of the most underrated teams in NBA history. The Houston Rockets' best regular season finish was in the 2017-2018 season with a record of 65-17. This team was constructed specifically to defeat the Kevin Durant Warriors team. James Harden was the MVP and the scoring champ with 30.4 points per game to go along with 8.4 assists, and he finally had someone who could take some of the ball handling burden off him in Chris Paul, who they acquired that offseason. They had a rim protector in Clint Capella and had 3-and-D role players surrounding them like Trevor Ariza and PJ Tucker. After beating the Timberwolves and the Jazz in 5 games respectively, the Rockets found themselves in a matchup against the super team of all super teams, the Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson Warriors, with home court advantage. For some reason, this playoff series doesn't get talked about as much as it should. The Rockets were up 3-2 through the first 5 games before Chris Paul got hurt with a hamstring injury in Game 5, missing Game 6 and Game 7. After getting killed in Golden State in Game 6, the Rockets had a great chance to win Game 7 at home, but the greatest reason they had to beat the Warriors shooting threes proved to be their reason they lost. The Rockets took a 54-43 lead into halftime before missing 27 straight threes, including 14 in the third quarter, which is a playoff record, going 7 of 44 for the game and falling to the Warriors by 9. It's one of the greatest what-ifs in NBA history. What if CP3 doesn't get hurt? Do they win the series and do CP and Harden get a ring? Does that have any effect on the Warriors going forward? What if they just make 4 or 5 of those 27 threes? Unfortunately, we'll never know, but this 2017-2018 Rockets team is one of the most fun teams that I believe has ever been constructed in league history. The Indiana Pacers' best regular season was in 2003 to 2004. They went 61-21, and it saw the rise in prominence of 2 young players, then Ron Artest and Jermaine O'Neal. Artest is one of the best defenders in all of the league and averaged 18 a game, while O'Neal averaged a double-double of 20 and 10. They also had double-digit scorers in Al Harrington and 38-year-old Reggie Miller. They ended up making the Eastern Conference Finals only to lose to the eventual champion, the Detroit Pistons. The 2013-2014 Los Angeles Clippers have the best regular season finish in their franchise's history with 57 wins and 25 losses. The mid-2010s for the Clippers was a golden era for the franchise. Their top 5 win totals came from 2012 to 2017. They were nicknamed Lob City due to CP3 throwing alley-oops to high flyers Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, and it really was an identity for this team. They beat the Warriors in the first round in 7 games, only to lose to the Thunder in the Western Conference Semis in 6. The Los Angeles Lakers have an unreal amount of successful seasons in Lakers history. The most successful, the 1971-72 Lakers. After appearing in the NBA Finals 7 of 10 seasons through the 1960s, Jerry West and the Lakers were finally able to win a ring. Gail Goodrich and Jerry West both averaged over 25 points per game that year. Jerry West led the league in assists with 9.7 a game, and Wilt Chamberlain led the league in rebounding at 35 years old with 19 a game. Our first tie of the video goes to the Memphis Grizzlies. They won 56 games in both 2013 and 2022. We'll cover the 2013 team first. They had a balanced scoring attack that consisted of Rudy Gay, Marc Gasol, Mike Conley, and Zach Randolph, and they got swept in the Western Conference Finals against the Spurs. 2022 Grizzlies were led by Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Desmond Bane. As it was just last year, we all remember they beat the Wolves in 6 after the Wolves blew like 3 20-point leads before falling to the eventual champions, the Warriors, in 6 games. The Miami Heat's best season in franchise history belongs to the 2012-2013 Heat with a 66-win, 16-loss season. This is the 3rd team to have the most wins in franchise history in the 2012-2013 season. LeBron won his 4th out of 5 MVPs this year, averaging 26.8, 7.3, and shooting 40.6% from 3. After defeating a young Paul George-led Pacers team in the Eastern Conference Finals, the Miami Heat found themselves in a dogfight with a San Antonio Spurs team led by Tony Parker, a 36-year-old Tim Duncan, and a 21-year-old Kawhi Leonard. The Heat almost lost this series in 6 games before Ray Allen hit a three-pointer off an offensive rebound with only a few seconds left, tying the game, sending it to overtime, where the Heat prevailed. They defeated the Spurs in Game 7, 95-88. It was also the second and last championship for the Heat Big Three. In order to find the Milwaukee Bucks' best season in franchise history, we have to go back to the 1970-1971 NBA regular season, where they finished 66-16. You can make the argument this was the best duo in NBA history in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson. Kareem averaged 31.7 points per game and 16 rebounds, while Oscar averaged 19.4 points per game and 8.2 assists. They also had Hall of Famer Bob Dandridge, who averaged 18.4 points per game that year. Kareem took home the Finals MVP and the MVP in this season, and they swept the Bullets in the Finals, who, believe it or not, also had 3 Hall of Famers in Wes Unseld, Earl Monroe, and Gus Johnson. The Minnesota Timberwolves have about 2 to 3 bright spots in their franchise's history, and by far the best season was the 2003-2004 team led by Kevin Garnett, who finished 58-24 and the number 1 seed in the West. KG was the most valuable player this season, averaging 24, 13.9, and 5. The minimal help KG had this season came from a 34-year-old Sam Cassell, who had one of his best seasons of his career this year, and a 33-year-old Latrell Sprewell. After a hard-fought series against the Kings, beating them in 7 in the Western Conference semis, they ended up losing in 6 games to the Shaq and Kobe Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. The New Orleans Pelicans technically only have a history that goes back to 2002, and that's because the NBA decided in 2014, when the Bobcats switched back to being the Hornets, that they would assume all historical stats from the Charlotte Hornets history, even though that franchise is technically the New Orleans Pelicans now. As confusing as that is, all you need to know is that the best season in New Orleans Pelicans history was the 2007-2008 season. They went 56-26. They beat the Mavs in 5 and then lost to the Spurs in 7. This season was the season all of us youngsters fell in love with Chris Paul and how he played the game of basketball. Our second tie of this video belongs to the New York Knicks. The 1969-1970 team and the 1992-93 team both went 60-22. The 69-70 team had 4 Hall of Famers on it: Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Dave DeBusschere, and Bill Bradley. They beat the Lakers in 7 games. Willis Reed was the Finals MVP, and he played in Game 7 after tearing his quad in Game 5 and sitting out Game 6. It's one of the coolest moments in NBA history. He makes his first 2 shots and then doesn't score the rest of the game, but that was all the momentum the Knicks needed to win that game. The 93 Knicks were led by Patrick Ewing and John Starks. They had the best defense in the league that year. They put up a valiant effort in the Eastern Conference Finals before falling to the Chicago Bulls in 6 games. The Seattle Supersonics / Oklahoma City Thunder's best season in franchise history was in Seattle. The 1995-96 Sonics went 64-18, led by Gary Payton and Sean Kemp. Unfortunately, this year belonged to the 96 Bulls. They took 2 games from them in the finals, but they ultimately fell short. The Orlando Magic's best season in franchise history, no surprise, comes from a 23-year-old Shaq and a 24-year-old Penny Hardaway in the 1995-96 season. They went 60-22. Shaq averaged 26.6 points per game and 11 rebounds, while Penny averaged 21.7 and 7 assists. Just like the Sonics, unfortunately, they ran to the 96 Bulls in the finals and got swept. Philadelphia 76ers' best season in franchise history was the 1966-67 season. They went 68-13. They also had 4 Hall of Famers on this team, led by Wilt Chamberlain and Hal Greer. Wilt was the MVP of the league this year, averaging 24 points, 24 rebounds, and 8 assists, and they defeated Rick Barry and the Warriors in 6 games in the NBA Finals. The Phoenix Suns' best season was last year, going 64-18, led by Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, and key role players in Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson. But they also couldn't get the job done, losing in the Western Conference semis in 7 games to Luka Doncic and the Dallas Mavericks. The 90-91 Trailblazers went 63-19, making them the best finish in franchise history. Clyde Drexler was the best player on this team. They also had Terry Porter and 5 other other players that averaged double figures. They fell short as well in the Western Conference Finals to the Lakers in 6 games. The 2001-2002 Sacramento Kings went 61-21 and made the Western Conference Finals. I don't have to tell you what happened in this series. Look it up on YouTube. There's plenty of videos that have covered this. The Kings were up 3-2 over the Los Angeles Lakers when a super controversial Game 6 occurred, having many fans questioning if this game was rigged in favor of the Lakers. I'll spare you the details, but it's not too far-fetched to imagine the NBA not wanting a New Jersey Nets Sacramento Kings NBA Finals. Chris Webber was the best player on this team, averaging 24.5 points per game and 10 boards. You also had Mike Bibby with 13.7 and 5 assists, and then Peja Stojakovic with 21 points per game, while shooting 41% from 3. The 2015-2016 San Antonio Spurs finished 67-15, led by 24-year-old Kawhi Leonard, who averaged 21 points per game. He was first team All-NBA and the Defensive Player of the Year this year. Somehow the Spurs team actually had a better net rating than the Warriors, yet they fell short as well in the Western Conference semis against the Oklahoma City Thunder, losing in 6 games. The 2017-2018 Toronto Raptors finished 59-23 and were led by DeMar DeRozan, who averaged 23 points per game, Kyle Lowry, who averaged 16.2 points and 6.9 assists. But even though they were the first seed in the Eastern Conference, LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers swept them in the Eastern Conference semis. The 96-97 Utah Jazz had the best finish in franchise history, going 64-18, and were led by MVP Karl Malone, averaging 27.4 points per game and 10 boards. They met the 97 Bulls in the finals and lost in 6 games. And the final team on this list is the Washington Wizards. But before they were the Wizards, they were the Bullets, and the best finish in this franchise's history comes from the 74-75 Washington Bullets, who went 60-22 and were led by 2 Hall of Famers in Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld. They reached the NBA Finals before getting swept by Rick Barry and the Golden State Warriors. Well, there you have it, the best regular season finish for every NBA franchise. What's interesting to me, if I counted correctly, only 5 out of the 30 NBA franchises' best regular season finishes ended in an NBA championship. So maybe there is something to the regular season doesn't matter crowd out there. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like videos like this, check out the video I just made on how far each seed has advanced in the NBA playoffs. And as always, we'll see you on the hardwood.